The League of Women Voters of Southeastern Connecticut welcomes you to our celebration of 100 years of women's suffrage. The 19th Amendment was signed August 18, 1920, as Tennessee was the 37th state to ratify this change to the U.S. Constitution. We welcome new members at all times and visitors to help us in our mission of empowering voters by helping them to register to vote and by facilitating the voting process, and by defending democracy by providing good information to voters. Our first speaker tonight is Joni DiMartino, playing the role of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. The speech that will be delivered was first delivered in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848.
When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one portion of the family of man to assume among the people of the earth a position different from that which they have hitherto occupied, but one to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes that impel them to such a course. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of those who suffer from it to refuse allegiance to it and to insist upon the institution of a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their duty to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of the women under this government, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to demand the equal station to which they are entitled. The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, having a direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she had no voice. He has withheld from her rights which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men, both natives and foreigners. Having deprived her of this first right of a citizen, the elective franchise, thereby leaving her without representation in the halls of legislation, he has oppressed her on all sides. He has made her, if married in the eyes of the law, civilly dead. He has taken from her all right in property, even to the wages she earns. He has made her morally an irresponsible being, as she can commit many crimes with impunity, provided that they be done in the presence of her husband. In the covenant of marriage, she is compelled to promise obedience to her husband, he becoming to all intents and purposes her master, the law giving him power to deprive her of liberty and to administer chastisement. He has so framed the laws of divorce as to what shall be the proper causes of divorce in case of separation, to whom the guardianship of the children shall be given, as to be wholly regardless of the happiness of women. The law, in all cases, going upon the false supposition of the supremacy of man, and giving all power into his hands. After depriving her of all rights as a married woman, if single and the owner of property, he has taxed her to support a government which recognizes her only when her property can be made profitable by it. He has monopolized nearly all the profitable employments, and from those she is permitted to follow, she receives but scanty remuneration. He closes against her all the avenues to wealth and distinction, which he considers most honorable to himself. As a teacher of theology, medicine, or law, she is not known. He has denied her the facilities for obtaining a thorough education, all colleges being closed against her. He allows her in church as well as state, but a subordinate position, claiming apostolic authority for her exclusion from the ministry, and with some exceptions, from any public participation in the affairs of the church. He has created a false public sentiment by giving to the world a different code of morals for men and women, by which moral delinquencies which exclude women from society are not only tolerated, but deemed of little account in man. He has usurped the prerogative of Jehovah himself, claiming it as his right to assign for her a sphere of action, when that belongs to her conscience and her God. He has endeavored in every way that he could to destroy her confidence in her own powers, to lessen her self-respect, and to make her willing to lead a dependent and abject life. Now, in view of this entire disenfranchisement of one half of the people of this country, their social and religious degradation, in view of the unjust laws above mentioned, and because women do feel themselves aggrieved, oppressed, and fraudulently deprived of their most sacred rights, we insist that they have immediate admission to all the rights and privileges which belong to them as citizens of the United States. In entering upon this great work before us, we anticipate no small amount of misconception, misrepresentation, and ridicule. But we shall use every instrumentality within our powers to effect our object. We shall employ agents, circulate tracts, petition the state and national legislators, and endeavor to enlist the pulpit and the press on our behalf. We hope this convention will be followed by a series of conventions, embracing every part of the country. Firmly relying upon the final triumph of the right and the true, we do this day affix our signatures to this declaration. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Know that we still remember you and admire you and appreciate what you've done. Our next speaker tonight is Susan B. Anthony, played by our own Christina Negron. Susan B. Anthony, is it a crime to vote? Is it a crime to vote? Susan B. Anthony.
Thanks, fellow sister suffragist Joanne. Welcome, fellow members of the League of Women Voters of Southeastern Connecticut, and our honored guests. As you can probably tell, I'm not actually Susan B. Anthony. Susan couldn't be here today She's doing shots with Governor Marcus Holcomb. She's so over it with temperance. She started all that stuff, but she's over it. And she's also trying to gin up, get it, support for women's suffrage. So she asked me to read her speech to you. So just to give you a little background, Susan was arrested and tried for illegally voting in the presidential election of 1872. And on the second day of her trial, the judge, who so had it in for her, asked her if she had anything to say before he rendered his verdict. That was a big mistake. She called the trial a high-handed outrage upon my citizens' rights, saying, "You have trampled underfoot every vital principle of our government. My natural rights, my civil rights, my political rights, my judicial rights, are all alike ignored." She castigated Justice Hunt for denying her a trial by jury, but said that even if he had allowed one, it wouldn't have been a jury of her peers, because women weren't allowed to be jurors. Okay, so she goes on to give this speech. Oh, wait a minute. Getting some breaking news. Wait, hang on yet. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, folks, this just in. The president in 2020 is granting Susan B. Anthony a full and complete pardon for this crime. Wait, hang on. He's saying, she was guilty for voting, and we're going to be signing a full and complete pardon. She was never pardoned. Did you know that? She was never pardoned. Okay, well, be that as it may, we're still going to hear some of this speech, okay? Susan B. Anthony, is it a crime for a U.S. citizen to vote? April 3rd, 1873. Friends and fellow citizens, I stand before you tonight under indictment for the alleged crime of having voted at the last presidential election without having a lawful right to vote. It shall be my work this evening to prove to you that in thus voting, I not only committed no crime, but instead simply exercised my citizens' rights, guaranteed to me and all United States citizens by the national Constitution, beyond the power of any state to deny. Our democratic Republican government is based on the idea of the natural right of each individual member thereof to a voice and a vote in making and executing the laws. We assert the province of government to be to secure the people in the enjoyment of their unalienable rights. We throw to the winds the old dogma that government can give rights. Nor can you find a word in any of the grand documents left us by the fathers that assumes for government the power to create or confer rights. The Declaration of Independence, the United States Constitution, the constitutions of the several states, and the organic laws of the territories, all alike propose to protect the people in the exercise of their God-given rights. Not one of them pretends to bestow rights. All men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Here is no shadow of government authority over rights, no exclusion of any class of men from their full and equal enjoyment. Here is pronounced the right of all men, and consequently, as the Quaker preacher said, of all women, yay, to a voice in the government. And here, in this very first paragraph of the Declaration, is the assertion of the natural right of all to the ballot. For how can the consent of the governed be given if the right to vote be denied? Surely the right of the whole people to vote is here clearly implied. However destructive to their happiness this government might become, a disenfranchised class could neither alter nor abolish it, nor institute a new one, except by the old brute force method of insurrection and rebellion. 1/2 of the people of this nation today are utterly powerless to blot from the statute books an unjust law or write there a new and just one. The women, dissatisfied as they are with this form of government that enforces taxation without representation, that compels them to obey laws to which they have never given their consent, that imprisons and hangs them without a trial by a jury of their peers, that robs them in marriage of the custody of their own persons, wages, and children, are, this half of the people, left wholly at the mercy of the other half, in direct violation of the spirit and letter of the declarations of the framers of this government, every one of which was based on the immutable principles of equal rights to all. The preamble of the federal Constitution says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." It was not we the people, it was we the people, not we the white male citizens, nor yet we male citizens, but we the whole people who formed this union. And we formed it not to give the blessings of liberty, but to secure them, not to the half of ourselves and half our posterity, but to the whole people, women as well as men. And it is a downright mockery to talk to women of their enjoyment of the blessings of liberty, while they are denied the use of the only means of securing them provided by this Democratic Republican government. A year ago, I was at Walla Walla, Washington Territory. I saw there a theatrical company called the Pixley Sisters, playing before crowded houses every night of the whole week of the territorial fair. The eldest of those three fatherless girls was scarcely 18. Yet every night a United States officer stretched out his long fingers and clutched $6 of the proceeds of the exhibitions of those orphan girls, who but a few years before were half starvelings in the street of the capital of that far-off Northwest Territory. So the poor widow, who keeps a boarding house, manufactures shirts, or sells apples and peanuts on the street corners, is compelled to pay taxes from her scanty pittance. I would that the women of this republic at once resolve never again to submit to taxation until their right to vote is recognized. Miss Sarah E. Wall of Worcester, Mass., 20 years ago took this position. For several years, the officers of the law distrained her property and sold it to meet the necessary amount. Still, she persisted and would not yield an iota, though every foot of her land should be struck off under the hammer. And now, for several years, the assessor has left her name off the tax list, and the collector passed her by without a call. Mrs. Ellen Van Valkenburg of Santa Cruz, California, who sued the county clerk for refusing to register her name, declares she will never pay another dollar of tax until allowed to vote. And all over the country, women property holders are waking up to the injustice of taxation without representation, and ere long will refuse en masse to submit to the imposition. It is upon this conclusion of the citizens' constitutional right to vote that our National Woman Suffrage Association has based its argument and action for the last 4 years. We no longer petition legislature nor Congress to give us the right to vote. We appeal to the women everywhere to assume that their too long-neglected citizens' right to vote. We appeal to the inspectors of elections everywhere to receive the votes of all U.S. citizens as it is their duty to do. We appeal to the United States commissioners and marshals to arrest the inspectors who reject the names and votes of United States citizens as it is their duty to do, and leave alone those who, like our 8th Ward inspectors, perform their duties faithfully and well. We ask the courts to render true and unprejudiced opinions of the law, and wherever there is room for a doubt, to give its benefit on the side of liberty and equal rights to all citizens, remembering that the true interpretation under our national Constitution, especially since its amendments, is that anything for human rights is constitutional and everything against human rights unconstitutional. We ask the juries to fail to return a verdict of guilty against honest, law-abiding, tax-paying United States citizens for offering their votes at our elections, or against intelligent, worthy young men, inspectors of elections, for receiving and counting such citizens' votes. And it is on this line that we propose to fight our battle for the ballot, all peaceably, but nevertheless persistently, through to complete triumph, when all United States citizens shall be recognized as equals before the law. So all that was said in the courtroom of a judge who instructed the jury to deliver a guilty verdict. And he continued to interrupt her and tell her to stop, just as happened to Elizabeth Warren, and yet she persisted. And so we do kind of repeat history, don't we? She was fined $100 for that which she refused to pay. So our next speaker tonight is Catharine Beecher, and her name might sound familiar because she was the half-sister of Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. And Catharine Esther Beecher was a 19th century teacher and writer who promoted equal access to education for women and advocated their roles as teachers and mothers. Embracing traits associated with femininity, such as nurturance, Beecher argued that women were uniquely suited to the moral and intellectual development of children, either as mothers or as educators. She never married after her fiancé, a Yale University professor, died in a shipwreck. Women don't need the vote. Catharine Beecher, women don't need the vote. Kim Blake.
Why the majority of women oppose women's suffrage. In our campaign before the voters of the state, we rest our cause on these fundamental truths. First, the majority of women do not wish to vote. According to the public statement of the Ohio Suffrage Association, its membership is 32,000, or 3% of women, less than 3% of women, of the state over 21 years of age. It is unwise, unfair, and unjust to force upon a majority of women a measure which is obnoxious to all their ideals of womanhood, in order that the wishes of a small minority may prevail. Second, we find no evidence in the states where women vote that they have contributed anything to the general welfare, which has not been duplicated in other states where female franchise does not exist. All necessary and permanent moral and social reform must be rooted in the home life of people. It is in the retirement of this quiet life, and not in the publicity of a noisy political campaign, that true womanhood seeks an opportunity to serve the state.
Votes for women.
Third, the payment of taxes and the right to vote have no connection whatever. A man may own property in half a dozen places in the state and in other states, but he can vote in only one, the place of his residence. Minors are fully taxed on their property, and so are aliens, but neither class can vote. Fourth, women lack the physical ability to exercise the franchise on the same terms as men.
Oh, come on.
Women are now exempt from jury service and liabilities to police service, including a call to arms in defense of the country. This exemption far more than compensates any gain which even the most ardent suffragists claim would result from conferring the right of suffrage upon women. Fifth, it is a mistake to presume that all women will vote right on moral issues.
Oh, come on.
Experience proves that many of the worst ills of social life are due to the influence of women of low ideals of right or wrong, or of degraded morals. Women of this type would be a most dangerous element in political life and would lend themselves to the support of immoral issues, backed by designing demagogues in a manner which could not be counteracted of women of reputation and character. To the ever-increasing courtesy of men as shown in the social relation of life, as well as to their constant protection in business affairs, women owe a debt of gratitude.
Oh.
In view of this courtesy and protection, the demand for so-called women's rights is both unbecoming and ungenerous.
Get the hook.
Oh, well done, well done. There's always a little arguing, isn't there? But thank you, Kim, for playing that role tonight. Our final speaker tonight is Mabel Washburn, played by our president, Irene Weiss. Ms. Washburn delivered this speech in 1920, the year that the League was founded, in 1921. She was the first president of the Connecticut League of Women Voters. And the reason for organizing the League was to form a nonpartisan organization which would develop a high quality of intelligence and self-directing activity in the woman voter and a program of legislation. It's my pleasure to introduce Mabel Washburn.
Well, Mabel had a lot to say, but unfortunately I didn't get it all from Joanne, so I just have a few words from Mabel, which gives me an opportunity to say my own few words first. As we've heard, women got the right to vote after 70 or more years of a lot of struggle, and there were complicated approaches for women getting the right to vote. Some who wanted to include everybody in the struggle, some who felt that they needed to trade off women of color so that they could get the Southern delegation to vote for the suffrage for women. But eventually women did get the vote. And just like with the civil rights legislation in the 50s, that didn't make women have all the rights that they needed. In fact, we're still fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment in Congress. That has not been passed. I remember when I was a kid hearing that women could never be newscasters because their voices were too shrill. And they couldn't possibly drive school buses because they weren't able to manage that kind of vehicle. And attitudes have changed since I was a kid, certainly since the women's suffrage succeeded. Gays nodding your head. You've heard, you all probably remember some of these comments, and they're still going on. And certainly the fight for justice for civil rights is still going on with voter suppression all over this country. So the League of Women Voters was formed in 1920 as an outgrowth of the suffrage movement because they had all this organization and they had all these great women with ideas and energy and organization, and they wanted to continue. And I'm very proud of the first president of the League of Women Voters of Connecticut, who said, "Much of the potential power of the League depends on its representative character. To be what it may become, it must include in its ranks women of all classes, creeds, races, and colors." This was 1920 or 21. That accomplishment alone would be worth all the work that is being put into it. It is a league of women voters, and every woman has her place in it.
Everybody smile this time.
Bring her up. Bring her up.
Okay.
Okay, come on, we're gonna take another round. Come on.
Okay.
Yay.